Good morning. I want to share with you one of my favorite characteristics about God, and it's going to sound really weird. One of my favorite characteristics about God is that He has a long nose. Yep, that's what I figured. No response because you have no idea what I'm talking about. But I want to say it this way. One of your favorite characteristics about God is that He has a long nose. Here's what I mean by that. In the Hebrew language, you have a phrase that God is long of nose. You see it several times in the Old Testament. God is long of nose. In our translations in English, we find the word long-suffering, patient, slow to anger. A lot of times when you're translating one language to another, you're not just translating words, sometimes you're translating phrases and idioms to where you find things like that. Or if someone is long of nose, it means they're long-suffering. It means that they're patient, they're slow to anger. And there's a reason for that. There's a reason it's worded that way in the original language. What's the kind of the first thing you just inherently do when someone is just really getting on your nerves? You breathe in through the nose, a long, drawn-out breath. That's the idea. God is slow to anger. He is patient. He is long-suffering. He's long in the nose. He takes that long breath. Because the thing is, we as humans have given God just about every reason we can possibly think of to be fed up with us. And yet so many times, God takes a long, deep breath with us and sticks with us. Do you consider yourself to be a patient person? Do you consider yourself to, in this case, have a long nose? Are you willing to suffer long? How patient are you with others when they treat you in ways that you wish they wouldn't? Some of us were probably ready to commit murder just on the drive over here. Whether that be other drivers or the people in your car with you. I told Nora the other day, I don't know if this makes sense or not, but I told her I don't have road rage. I have road rage. And what I mean by that is the thing that fills me with the most rage is when other people have road rage. That's what gets on my nerves the most. You know the kind of people I'm talking about. The people who they drive in such a way to where you know they are very upset about something. They're going right up on your bumper and they stay on your bumper for a long period of time until they have a chance to fly over in the other lane and get around you. They're cutting in and out of traffic. If you ever drive to Nashville much, you've experienced it many times. Me and Nora, we decided to get season tickets to the Nashville Zoo this past year. And so we've gone there many times, and every single time we see people driving with what I would consider road rage. They're going all over the place. And that's the kind of thing that makes me mad. The thing about it is, and this is just a simple fact, many of us are not very patient. We're not very long in the nose. We're not very long-suffering. And even the most minor of inconveniences can just set us off. If that's the case, how would we respond to a person who intentionally slanders us? How would we respond to a person who intentionally insults us? How would we respond to someone who intentionally seeks to harm us? How are we going to handle persecution if or when it comes our way as followers of Christ? How are we going to do? The thing is, we've been very, very blessed. Not just to be Americans, but to be Tennesseans. We live in a part of the country where Christianity has not just been tolerated, it's been celebrated. And so we've not really had to deal with a great amount of persecution. Maybe you'll have a few friends snicker at you, but compared to what people are experiencing in other parts of the world for being Christians, we've not experienced persecution. What happens when we do? When the slightest little thing will set us off. Now, what happens when we start facing the really hard stuff? Long-suffering, patience, it's a fruit of the Spirit. It's a characteristic of someone who has set their mind on the ways of God and on the gospel of Christ. This morning, we're going to see the perfect example of long-suffering. We're going to be in Matthew chapter 26, verses 57 through 68. Last week we saw Jesus betrayed and arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane, and this week we're going to see where they take Jesus. They've arrested him, and now they're taking him somewhere. They're taking him to court. But not just any court. They are taking him to the highest court of the Jews. They're taking him to the Supreme Court. They're taking him to the Sanhedrin. Now, typically this is what it would look like when someone is in the court of the Sanhedrin. You've got the accused standing there in the middle of them all. You've got 35 members on each side, and then you've got that 71st member, the high priest, right there in the middle. And they will question the accused and decide a verdict on that person. Jesus is about to be on trial before the Sanhedrin. But the thing about his case is it's going to be anything but just, anything but fair. And we're going to see that as we go. Let's go ahead and jump into the text. Verse 57. Those who had seized Jesus led him away to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the scribes and elders were gathered together. But Peter was following him at a distance, as far as the courtyard of the high priest, and entered in and sat down with the officers to see the outcome. After Jesus is arrested in the garden, Matthew tells us that they took him to Caiaphas. Now, if you were to read John's account, you'd find that they actually took Jesus to Annas first. He was the father-in-law of Caiaphas. He used to be the high priest, but then the Romans replaced him with his son-in-law, Caiaphas. But we're just going to stick with Matthew's account in the Synoptic Gospels. Matthew tells us that he's taken to Caiaphas, the Roman-appointed high priest. And normally what that would mean when they took him to Caiaphas, that would mean they would take him to what we saw in that picture, this chamber of hewn stone that's within the temple complex. Normally that's what that would mean, but Luke's account is a little bit more forward and tells us they took Jesus to Caiaphas' house. Not to the temple, not to the official meeting place. They took him to Caiaphas' house. And according to the Mishnah, that's against the rules. You're not supposed to have an official trial, or a trial really of any kind, outside of the official meeting place. So they're breaking rules with trying to get Jesus killed, trying to put him to death. Now, that's not the only rule they're going to break. They're going to break many more. For one, trials were to be conducted in the daylight. This is the middle of the night. Trials were to be conducted were not to be conducted on the eve of a Sabbath or the eve of a festival day. Turns out, this day is the eve of a Sabbath. It's Friday, and it's during the Passover. Breaking many of their rules, and it's just showing us what a sham this trial is. breaking so many of their own rules that they have set for themselves. They're breaking all of these things just to get Jesus. And several, if not all, of the members of the Sanhedrin seem to already be gathered there at Caiaphas' house. They're waiting for Jesus to arrive as a prisoner. And then Matthew tells us that Peter was following this mob that arrested Jesus. Peter's kind of doing this kind of secret spy sort of thing where he's just quietly keeping track with them and staying far enough away to where they don't notice him. And he's able to sneak into or make himself a way into the priest's courtyard there. And he's wanting to figure out what's going on. The other accounts tell us that he kind of sits there by the fire and warms himself, and he tries to keep an eye on what all is going on with this trial of Jesus. And Matthew doesn't just tell us this for no reason. There's a reason Matthew's telling us about what's going on with Peter. There's a reason, because Matthew wants to show us that there is this other storyline, this second storyline that's developing alongside the storyline of Jesus' arrest and trial. It isn't just Jesus that is on trial. We're going to see next week, Peter also is on trial in a sort. Keep on reading, verse 59. Now the chief priests and the whole council kept trying to obtain false testimony against Jesus, so that they might put him to death. They did not find any, even though many false witnesses came forward. But later on, two came forward and said, "This man stated, 'I am able to destroy the temple of God and to rebuild it in 3 days.'" So Jesus' trial begins, and many of the members of the Sanhedrin, they begin to make these false accusations. They come forward and they're bringing up all these accusations against Jesus that are just blatantly not true. They wanted to find something that warranted the death penalty. Now, this already shows us this is not a fair trial. There's nothing fair, there's nothing just about this, because Jesus here, according to the Sanhedrin, is guilty until proven guilty. This is the idea. They already have their minds made up. This man is going to be deserving of death. Now we just got to figure out why. He's already going to die. We just got to figure out a good reason to make it happen. The verdict is already decided. But they have trouble producing the evidence that's going to be necessary to make this happen, because the problem is the law of Moses. The law of Moses requires that they have 2 or 3 witnesses whose testimonies agree with each other. And they can't produce that. Out of 71 members, they can't produce 2 stories that agree with each other. The thing is, the law of Moses says that false witnesses are to be put to death. There's a whole lot of false witnesses coming up and making false testimonies about Jesus in order to get him killed. There should have been a lot of members of the Sanhedrin who were put to death. The scriptures give us no indication that a single one was even wagged a finger at. There's nothing fair about this trial. This is a corrupt court trying to do a very corrupt thing. The only person they were concerned with killing was the only person there who was actually innocent. They eventually had 2 witnesses come forward, and they said, "We heard this man say that he was able to destroy the temple and that he would rebuild it in 3 days." Mark's account tells us that even those 2 testimonies weren't very consistent. There were still some things that were not quite straight between those 2 stories. But apparently it was good enough for Caiaphas, because he's going to take it and run with it in just a minute when we look at the next text. But first I want to take a look at, what are they referring to? What are they talking about? They both have this story that he said that he's able to destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days. Where are they getting this from? When did Jesus ever say that? The thing is, he didn't. He never said that. But they are misquoting something he did say that we find only in John's account, in John chapter 2. In verse number 19, Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." Jesus never said, "I will destroy the temple." He said they would. They will destroy the temple. And then, if you keep on reading, you just go 2 verses down in John's account, and you find in John 2:21, but he was speaking of the temple of his body. He wasn't even talking about the temple in Jerusalem. He was talking about himself. He was talking about his own body. He was talking about his death and his resurrection. And so their testimony about Jesus saying that he would destroy the temple and then raise it up in 3 days, that also is false testimony. It's not what he said. And it's definitely not what he meant. But what's ironic is they were misquoting Jesus' words in an attempt to fulfill his actual words. What Jesus was actually talking about was his death, and they were using this misquote to put him to death. The thing is, they are very, very serious about this. Any kind of negative word said about the temple was very serious business. Very serious business to the Jewish leaders. And they're going to continue to falsely accuse him of saying this against the temple, even while he's dying on the cross. If you were to skip forward to Matthew chapter 27 and verse 40, they said, "You who are going to destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross." This is very, very serious to them, because they held the temple almost to the place of God himself. So you speak ill of the temple, that's as if you're speaking ill of God, and we're not going to stand for that. Get to verse 62. The high priest stood up and said to him, "Do you not answer? What is it that these men are testifying against you?" But Jesus kept silent. And the high priest said to him, "I adjure you by the living God that you tell us whether you are the Christ, the Son of God." So Caiaphas gives Jesus the opportunity to respond, the opportunity to defend himself, as the law demanded that he do. But Jesus says nothing. Jesus doesn't respond. Jesus doesn't oppose the accusations, even though he knows they are false. He doesn't try to assert his innocence, even though he is. He doesn't defend himself whatsoever. He stays completely silent. He allows them to say the things they're saying, and he just takes it. Then Caiaphas, he's not too happy with that. He wants Jesus to speak because they want him to open his mouth and condemn himself. They want to, as they've been doing throughout his ministry, they want him to say something so they can grab it and twist it and make it mean what they want it to mean. And so he charges Jesus under an oath to God. This was pretty typical. This was a way to get the defendant to speak, a way to force them to speak up. "I charge you under oath. I adjure you by the living God. Are you the Christ? Are you the Messiah, the Son of God?" And to this question, Jesus is going to respond. Verse 64. Jesus said to him, "You have said it yourself. Nevertheless, I tell you, hereafter you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven." Matthew likes to quote Jesus as saying, "You have said it yourself." And you look at the other accounts, and they normally just say, "Yes." This is Matthew's way of saying, "Yes. Yes, I am the Christ. I am the Son of God." And after all of this is over, in the hereafter, he says, once all this trial and my death is over, you're going to see the fulfillment of Psalm 110 and Daniel 7. He quotes both of those passages and kind of fits them together into a sentence. Psalm 110:1 says, "The Lord says to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet." In Daniel 7, verses 13 and 14 say, "I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, one like a son of man was coming. And he came up to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion, glory, and a kingdom, that all the peoples, nations, and men of every language might serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which will not pass away, and his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed. See, both of these passages refer to a human coming up to God who is going to sit at the right hand of God in heaven, and he's going to share God's divine rulership, God's divine authority over the world. This is big. This is huge stuff that Jesus is claiming about himself. And essentially, the message that they are taking from Jesus, and rightfully so, is that you may think that you are the rulers. You may think that you are the ones in charge. You are my judges. But you're going to see for yourself. After all this is over, I'm going to be the one in charge. I'm going to be the ruler. I'm going to be your judge. Verse 65. Then the high priest tore his robes and said, "He has blasphemed. What further need do we have of witnesses? Behold, you have now heard the blasphemy. What do you think?" They answered, "He deserves death." Then they spat in his face and beat him with their fists. And others slapped him and said, "Prophesy to us, you Christ. Who is the one who hit you?" Caiaphas and the rest of the Sanhedrin, they understood what Jesus meant. They understood his words. He was claiming, at least in some part, equality with God. He was going to be in heaven at the right hand of God, sharing the authority and the rulership of God. They understood the ramifications of what Jesus was saying about himself. And so, they said that's blasphemy. And according to the Mishnah, the judges who witness a blasphemy, they are to tear their robes. And that's exactly what Caiaphas did. He tears his robes. He says there's no need for more witnesses. Why would we need 2 or 3 witnesses when all of us heard it? We all heard what Jesus just said. And they agree he deserves death. But the thing about it is, they aren't allowed to put someone to death as Jews, because they're under the authority of Rome. Rome does not allow them to execute capital punishment, and so they're going to have to convince the Roman governor to do it for them. They're going to have to convince Pontius Pilate that this man deserves to die. And now they've got what they want. They've got something they believe is deserving of death, this blasphemy. And so they're going to proceed to physically abuse him and, as Luke puts it, blaspheme him. They blindfold him first. And they want to test his messiahship. They want to test if he is the Christ. So they begin to spit on him, slap him, beat him, and mock him, saying, "You ought to know who's doing it. If you truly are a prophet, if you truly are the Son of God, the Messiah, then you know. You know who's doing this." And just as Isaiah had foreshadowed, Jesus surrenders to every single humiliating and painful blow. Isaiah 50 and verse 6 says, "I gave my back to those who strike me, and my cheeks to those who pluck out the beard. I did not cover my face from humiliation and spitting." How long in the nose are you? How patient are you with others when they treat you in ways that you wish they wouldn't? How long are you willing to suffer? In this passage, we see Jesus being slandered. We see him being wrongfully accused, physically assaulted and abused, mercilessly mocked, humiliated. And why? Because he did what was good? Because he told the truth? because he is the Messiah, the Son of God. Everything about this trial was corrupt. It was unjust. Yet, he didn't fight back. Everything about this was wrong, and yet he didn't even try to defend himself. He quietly allowed it all to happen to him. He submitted to their unjust treatment of him. And he did it for two main reasons. One, to ensure that he would in fact die on the cross and save the world. But two, because that's what God's kingdom is all about. That's what it's about. We don't fight back against those who hate us for loving Jesus. We're called to submit to their slander, to their false accusations, to their abuse, to their mocking. We submit because in submission, those who seek our harm see the love of Jesus. In our submission, they see his gentleness. They also see his power. Because they see people who refuse to be defeated. Because we know that the victory has already been won for us. No matter what they say to us, no matter what they do to us, they can't take the hope that we have in Jesus away from us. They can take our lives, but they can't take them forever. Because our hope is in resurrection life in the age to come. The easy thing is to fight back. That's the gut reaction. It's so easy for us to have road rage like we joke about. Because it's a gut reaction. When someone does something to you or near you that you don't like, it's a gut reaction to get angry about it and want to lash out. And road rage is easy because you're in the protection of your car. Our gut reaction is to fight back. The hard thing to do is to submit to it. We've been called to a greater purpose, and our purpose is to follow in the steps and the example of Jesus, and that's exactly what Peter tells us to do. In 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 21, for you have been called for this purpose, since Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example for you to follow in his steps, who committed no sin, nor was any deceit found in his mouth. And while being reviled, he did not revile in return. While suffering, he uttered no threats, but kept entrusting himself to him who judges righteously. And he himself bore our sins in his body on the cross, so that we might die to sin and live to righteousness. For by his wounds you were healed. We're called to be long in the nose. We're called that when we are suffering for Christ, to breathe and take it. Because that's exactly what Jesus did for us. When persecution comes, and it will come, it's going to come for those who are trying to live for God and for Christ. It's going to come. When it comes, we're called to take that deep, long breath and follow the humble, peaceful, submissive ways of Jesus. We're called to suffer long for his glory. And we can have patience. We can have that fruit of the Spirit when our minds are focused on the gospel of Jesus. When our minds are focused on Jesus' suffering. How he suffered long to redeem us from sin and from death. And how he is now sitting at the right hand of God, and he is fully aware of the way that we're being treated and what the world is doing to us. And we know that he's going to return. He's going to resurrect us to a life that never ends. The victory has already been won. We don't have to fight. because there's not a battle to fight anymore. We don't fight flesh and blood. The spiritual works of darkness, they're coming after us, but they've already been defeated. All we have to do is follow Jesus. It just so happens that that's the hardest path to take, the one of submissiveness. But Jesus has already done it. It's not like our God is asking us to do something He's unwilling to do Himself. He's already done it. We've got to follow in those steps. And so I'm going to leave you with that this morning. Follow the example, follow the footsteps of Jesus. Surrender to Him. And part of surrendering to Him means surrendering to persecution. Persecution will come, and there's going to be times where we're not going to be able to run away. In those times, we have an example to follow. And in our punishment for being Christ followers, God's going to be glorified. We just got to stay strong. We got to learn to breathe. Deep breath. Stay faithful. If you have any needs at all this morning, if you are not a follower of Jesus Christ, you want to be a follower, you want to give your life to Him, to receive that wonderful hope that we have, that He's going to return, He's going to save His people. If you want to be baptized into Christ this morning, be baptized into Christ, fully giving yourself to Him. Christians, those who have already given yourself to Christ, are you living for Christ? Stay faithful to Him. Rededicate yourself to Him if that's what you need to do today. If you just need our prayers, need encouragement, whatever you need, you can see the elders in the back of the room, or you can come forward as we stand and sing.